For those who can hear me already, we're just waiting another 30 seconds to let people join in and get their audio going. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome here to the Professional Development Seminar on Learning Modules. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us and to learn about these modules. We will get started right away. Just a few housekeeping notes. You will be on mute for the presentation portion of this session. You can put questions in the chat though, and I will try to monitor those and keep an eye on them. We do have a Q&A session planned towards the end. And at that time, you will be able to turn on your video and unmute yourself and ask questions that way. Or if you're more comfortable, you can also put your questions into the chat even during that final Q&A session. Now, having said that, we'll get started. My name is Michael Gregoire. I am the Director of Professional Standards at Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba. In that role, I wear several hats. One of them is to assist our investigations committee in assessing complaints and prosecuting members for disciplinary actions. Another one is in the processes of developing bylaw changes and even act changes. Another hat I wear relates to enforcement. People who are pretending to be engineers and shouldn't be. I also assist the Continuing Competency Committee in their endeavors to manage the ProDev program. And then the fifth hat that I wear is in this realm, which is to develop practice guidelines and practice notes for the membership. So having said that, let's jump into the topic today, which is the learning modules. Just to give you a sense of what we'll talk about, I'm going to give you a background on the genesis of these learning modules. Then we'll talk about the development and how we got to the stage where we are now in terms of the published learning modules. We'll talk about which modules we have currently published and which ones we're planning to bring out soon. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak peek here today on those few. And then I'm going to show you a quick demo on how to access the modules themselves, and we'll do a quick visual on how to get through them and how to actually complete the modules and how that plays with your online profile. We shouldn't take a whole hour here today. We should be fairly quick, but we'll get through this background information first. We'll do the demo, and then we'll get into Q&A. So genesis of online modules. In this part, I'm just going to talk about the concept of proactive regulation. Then we'll talk about the professional development piece to this. And then we'll also talk a bit about the regulatory shifts that are feeding into and causing these kinds of new efforts by regulatory body. So this concept that's come up over the last few years is proactive regulation. And to really understand it, we should start talking about reactive methods of regulating. And the reactive method is one that's sort of embedded into our legislation. It's the way professional regulators operated for decades up until recent times. And really what we're talking about here is sort of a whack-a-mole approach, which is that if a problem crops up, we're going to address that problem, and then we're going to move on. It really relies on a complaint being sent to the association, our investigation committee undertaking an investigation, potential discipline, and trying to correct the behavior that has already occurred. The problem with the reactive methods of regulation is that harm has already occurred, and we really see that there's low reporting rates. Whenever there's research done into this, we find out that not all of the issues that crop up are brought to the attention of the association, and so it doesn't really address the larger problems. In fact, the complaints that we see are just kind of a hint as to what's going on in the overall practice realm. It's not to say that this method is bad or wrong. We need to have a reactive method. There needs to be teeth to our legislation, and we need to make sure that people are disciplined in certain instances where they've crossed the line. But one of the things that regulators are starting to do is to have proactive regulation. built in on top of the reactive regulation. And to have an understanding of what that looks like, we're going to talk about the layers of proactive methodologies that a professional regulator can undertake. The list that I provided here demonstrates a little bit of a spectrum for you in terms of things that a regulator can do to be proactive. At one end of the spectrum, we have publishing guidelines, which is something that we've done for decades. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have this concept of audits. And then the ones in between are sort of, they become progressively more interactive in terms of the communications and back and forth that happens between the association and the individual member. So at the low end of the spectrum, we have publishing guidelines, which means that we really just develop some ideas and some guidance for the membership. We post them on the website, and there they reside. The intention being that, well, you should know that those guidelines are there and that you should read them as a practicing member. It's a very passive method of proactive regulation. At the other end of the spectrum, we have these audits, and this is a new concept that's been implemented in other provinces. We don't have it here in Manitoba yet, obviously, but BC and Alberta, the engineers there have already started to do auditing programs, and that is, an intensive inspection that occurs. A representative of the association goes down, they look through a member's records, and they try to find out, well, have you stepped over the boundaries in any way? Are you following guidelines? Are you adhering to our code of ethics, et cetera, et cetera? And then there's a guidance that's provided to that individual based on the audit that applied to their company or them as an individual. In between these, we've got things like offering courses, which is what we're going to kind of talk about today. There's also the concept of self-reporting, which is an individual assesses themselves and provides feedback that the association can access. There's also this concept of testing. The interesting thing about this testing component is that we all know that when we apply to become a member, we are tested. We're tested on things like, do we understand the bylaws? Do we know and understand the code of ethics? Do we know and understand issues related to the legal aspects of being a professional engineer or geoscientist? And the interesting thing is that we test people when they apply to be a member, but we don't then test again. And obviously the bylaws, even the code of ethics and legal principles change over time, and we don't ever test again. So somebody who's been practicing for decades, they've indicated, they've proven their demonstration of knowledge for bylaws and code of ethics possibly 30 years ago. But do they understand today's bylaws and code of ethics? It's unknown in our current system. So with that primer on the benefits of a proactive regulation, just give you a hint of what sort of precipitated this particular type of effort from our association. The first one comes from our Continuing Competency Committee, who's been managing the ProDev program, our Continuing Professional Development Program, for over 10 years now. And they've started to look at, okay, well, we do have a nice variety of activities that we require members to do. We expect there to be compliance through undertaking 3 categories every year. But what they were seeing was that members were falling into a pattern of, well, they do the same 3 categories year in, year out. And none of those categories relate to the profession itself, potentially. And so they've been asking the question, well, should there be a requirement for our members at least once every couple of years to indicate that they're learning about the concepts of professionalism or ethics related to our profession, just to stay up to speed on those topics. It's also, a conversation that's been happening at the national level. When I talk to my counterparts in other provinces, it's the same kind of idea and concept that's been happening there. Well, it's nice that we have people reporting professional development, but we need to make sure that some of that professional development, or minimal amount of it, relates to the issues of professionalism that we oversee. This particular endeavor was also precipitated in part by requests from members. There was a lot of requests even before COVID times to have access to professional development opportunities. How can I get more professional development activities? Some of you who've been a member long enough, you may remember the time when we would have regular luncheons that would happen at a hotel. Well, those were fine, except that we tended to see the same group show up for those sessions month in, month out. And so we've been looking for ways to try to reach out to a broader audience, and we're hoping that these modules will accomplish that. Another important aspect in terms of background on the development of these modules, or why they were developed, relates to this concept of regulatory shifts. We've definitely seen some shifts in the complaints that we received over the last 10 to 15 years. The people who submit complaints are changing. There's more people from the general membership or general public. We're even seeing complaints that come in from authorities having jurisdiction, for example. So the sources of complaints are changing, but also the types of complaints are changing. There's more of an expectation from society and from other professionals that we hold ourselves to the standard expected of a professional in terms of issues of things like good character, for example. Another shift that's been occurring is the awareness and scrutiny happening by the media and news outlets. It would have been uncommon for an article to be written in a news outlet in the past about a professional regulator, but they've become much more common. There's much more awareness around professional regulators within standard news outlets. Another shift that we're seeing relates to umbrella legislation, which is the concept that a government will put in place a piece of legislation or an act that oversees professional regulatory acts. In Manitoba, we have now what's called the Regulated Health Professions Act. It's a broad piece of legislation that covers doctors, nurses, et cetera, and it's sort of another indication that changes are being expected by the public in terms of how we regulate professions. Another shift that's happening is third-party reviews. So there's organizations that'll come in, say from the UK. They're hired as a consultant, either by the government or directly by a regulator, to look at the processes that we undertake and to give advice. And so all of these elements indicate a desire or a need for professional regulators to keep evolving and to stay modern, and to make sure that we're achieving our end of protecting the public. So that leads us into the concept of online modules and the development of them. So just to give you a sense of what we did once we decided to do them, how did we develop these modules? So in this section, I'll talk about a review of the existing options out there. We'll talk about this notion of interactive elements, which leads right into this e-learning concept. And then we'll talk briefly about the structure before we go through the list of our modules and the demonstration of how to access them. So when we started this process, we asked ourselves, what's happening out there already? What are other regulators and other provinces doing? The PEAK program in Ontario, that's essentially the equivalent of our ProDev program, but with some significant differences. One of them is that the PEAK program in Ontario, they were one of the most recent to initiate a professional development program, they included a requirement to undertake ethics training as part of their PEAK program. So we looked at their program. We also looked at Newfoundland, who was one of the first out the door with these kinds of, not these kinds, but with a proactive module relating to professionalism and ethics. What we found with both of those programs was that essentially what they had done is they developed a video, and it had a couple points during the video where you would have to stop and answer a multiple choice question. But otherwise, it was essentially a unidirectional flow of information, fairly what I'd call old school way of delivering information, similar to what we're doing today, in fact. But then we saw the examples from BC, and those really wowed us in terms of, oh, this seems to be what we're looking for, and this is what we want to do going forward. For anybody who hasn't had a chance, I do recommend checking out BC's library. They've actually revamped their formatting, and I've got a link there on the slide that you can use to access what they call their Knowledge Center now. It has a lot of learning modules that are similar to ours. So having seen BC's model, we decided we want to have something similar to that. And part of the reason that we wanted to implement something like BC's was the fact that research is showing the importance of interactive engagement when it comes to learning a topic. This is just sort of one study that that I found that sort of highlights this this effectiveness of interactive engagement. You'll see that the white squares, circles, and diamonds on this graph represent interactive engagement, whereas the ones filled with yellow represent traditional delivery of information and learning. And on the x-axis, what we have is, what did the person score before the learning engagement? And then on the y-axis is how much better did they do after the learning session. And it's pretty clear. You can see that the traditional, the yellow method has very little gain. In fact, it sort of caps out at a 23% gain in learning when you follow that traditional method. But when we use an interactive method, that jumps up, and the maximum gain you see there is closer to 50% in terms of how they perform in the pre-test versus the test after the information session or the engagement. And so what we learned in doing the research during our development of these modules was this idea of e-learning. And so e-learning is a pretty broad idea. It's learning conducted via electronic media, typically on the internet, but it can be done in a very interactive way, and it has a lot of benefits to it. So I'm just going to run through this very long list of benefits, just to show why we ended up going down this road. The first three are really key. We're talking about how well can we get this information out, and how easy is it for members to access these modules. The nice thing about e-learning is that there's no geographic barrier. So people who are stationed in Dauphin or Thompson or maybe even Churchill, they can access these documents or these modules just as easily as somebody in Winnipeg. They can also be developed in a way that they are accessible through all kinds of devices, laptop, tablet, or your phone. They're built and designed to be usable on any of those platforms. And then, of course, there's the reality that there's no cost involved with accessing these. That you don't have to travel to somewhere. We don't have to book a special venue to hold a session. And in these COVID times, that benefit is highlighted even more. There is one downside, of course, which is that there's not the same element of networking. So in the pre-COVID times, in the lunch and learns that we would hold at a hotel, the side effect was that people were in the same room, learning about something, chatting with each other at the table, hanging around a bit afterwards, and discussing the topic at hand, or maybe something else entirely different. That we don't get with an e-learning module, but we're addressing that now through sessions like the ones that we're holding today and in future months. But the list of benefits for e-learning goes on. It does address multiple learning styles. So the combination of text, graphics, video, and interactive elements, they sort of address each person's learning styles, or helps to cover a more wider variety of styles. There's also a consistency aspect. So once the e-learning module is developed, we know that everybody's getting the same thing, instead of multiple people delivering presentations, and maybe there isn't the same consistency in that delivery. It also allows digital record keeping, which is kind of an interesting aspect that we'll touch on at the very end when I do the demo. But people who access the e-learning module, it can be recorded automatically. They also allow the user to take them at their own pace, which is kind of a nice aspect. So if there's something that you really want to sort of delve into and get deeper into, you don't have to wait until everything's over to do that. You do it at your pace, and you can sort of spend the time on each section as you need. It does also allow for tracking. What's interesting about this is that the developers of the e-learning modules can see, well, which elements are people really sort of getting into, which ones are they really attracted to, and we can sort of build on that knowledge to improve our e-learning modules going forward. They also allow for a team of experts to build these. Again, instead of an individual like myself just sort of talking about my understanding of things, there's so much background input that gets put into an e-learning module, and we get that access to a team to make sure that the information has everything that it needs. And then finally, there's a nice aspect of feedback. Certainly people are more comfortable to sort of type in their comments about a module than they would be to come up to a speaker and tell them what they liked or didn't like about a presentation. So I'm just going to touch quickly on the structure of these modules when they were developed. Initially the topic that the way we would talk about this is that we want to develop ethics modules. That's what we kept referring to it. Even at discussions at the national level, we kept saying, well, we want to have these ethics modules. But as we kind of delved into it, we realized that really what we're talking about here is that we're looking to develop professionalism modules, and ethics is certainly a key component of that. And it's why it's one of the first modules that we developed. But really, we're talking about the broader concept of professionalism, and ethics is a foundational piece. But we're going to be going into topics that are beyond just the code of ethics itself. And so that's why we decided to develop 3 modules in conjunction, which was the introduction to professionalism, which is essentially the first module you should take in the series, and then build from there into core concepts like the code of ethics and good character. One of the other interesting things that's worth noting is that when we were developing these, it being the first time that our association had been involved in the development of e-learning modules, was that the process really has 2 stages to it, which was the content and then the layout. And then there's this tertiary aspect of narration. It's quite the process to make sure that we have everything fleshed out in terms of content first, then the layout, which has the visuals and the interactive elements and what have you. But then also, picking a narrator and making sure that their script follows the content itself, and make sure that that all marries well, because we want to make sure that these are accessible, which means that yes, we have the on-screen portions with text, but we want to have provide people with the opportunity to listen to that delivery through narration as well. The other unexpected element was that it really caused us to do an in-depth review of our existing guidelines. And that was a nice piece, because when we engage a third-party company to develop the e-learning modules, we sort of present them with, oh, well, here's the documentation we have. And the questions they asked as experts in learning or in education really helped us to sort of flesh out pieces of our guidelines that that led to improvement of our documentation. So that was kind of a nice aspect. So let's talk quickly about the modules that are available. Hopefully you've seen this list already, but if you haven't, we have 4 modules that are currently available. 2 were released in the fall of 2021. 2 were released in the winter of this year. And so what we have available right now for members is Introduction to Professionalism, the Code of Ethics module, the Good Character module, and the ProDev module. And the idea is that we will keep releasing modules, developing and releasing modules as we go forward as well. And just to give you a brief overview, so the Introduction to Professionalism module is really trying to give a high-level view of what is the concept of professionalism and how does it bake into our legislation and what we're required to do as members. So in that Introduction to Professionalism, we do touch on topics like ethics and character, but we sort of make sure that it's all understood as one broad concept. And we look in there at, comparing what does it take to become a member, and how can we use that information to understand what it takes to maintain our professionalism throughout the decades-long career that we undertake. So from that broad topic, we get into specifics. So the Code of Ethics module looks at our current Code of Ethics and also provides examples of disciplinary actions that were taken against individuals for violating the Code of Ethics. And so it really helps to provide real-world examples of how we can apply the Code of Ethics and where it can go wrong. Similarly, the Good Character Guideline talks about these broad issues of good character. We talk about things like conduct unbecoming in that guideline or that learning module. And then again, we also provide real-world examples where an individual was disciplined in instances where their good character was lacking, or you could say they had a lack of good character. The fourth module that's out right now is the ProDev program module. It's really intended more for new members or for interns to get an understanding of, how do we use the ProDev program and what are the benefits of it, and how do we access certain things like applications for abatement. So that's the current 4 that we have available for the membership. We have 3 that are currently in development. One is the conflict of interest learning module, and this talks about that really sticky topic of, when should I pull back from a project, or when should I notify people about a potential conflict? And it talks about the different kinds of conflicts that exist, real versus perceived, and how to address those properly, how to sort of make an assessment, how to communicate to the parties involved, and how to make sure that we don't get called out for bias or for violating these concepts of conflict of interest. The other one is the authentication of documents guideline, which is being developed into an e-learning module. That guideline is by far our most referenced guideline on the website. It does get revamped regularly. We have questions all the time on a weekly basis on this topic. And when should I apply my stamp? When can I retract a document? Should I put my stamp on an as-built drawing, et cetera, et cetera. So we expect that e-learning module will be well received and taken up in high volume. The next one is the expert witness e-learning module and the accompanying guideline that will go with that. This is a concept that we borrowed from Ontario, where they've given guidance to members in instances where they're going to be acting as an expert. So whether that's in a civil court case or even in a professional regulatory scenario, when you're called to be an expert, which happens commonly for professionals like engineers and geoscientists, what's expected of you and how do you undertake that endeavor in a proper manner. And so that'll hopefully provide guidance for members who do have the chance to act as an expert. So that's the background on the genesis, the development, the structure of the modules, and then our current and future list. So now we're going to do a quick demo of how to actually access these modules. And I'll just give you a visual sneak peek at some of them, because I'm assuming if you're in this session, you haven't yet accessed these modules and are maybe wondering, how do I do that and what do they look like? I've got a screenshot here on the slideshow. It's intended more for people who are accessing these slides afterwards. But just so you know, there's 2 main methods, and I'll show you both. First method is accessing it from the public website side, and the second method is from within your own online profile on our system. So I'm going to stop sharing the slideshow here and see if we can switch over to the browser itself. Good, that looks like that worked. So this is our home page right now. And you see the banner that runs across the front of our front page. Sorry, Zoom's little window is blocking my view. And of course, we are marketing these learning modules right now on the front page. But this should be familiar to you. If you go to EngGeoMB.ca, this is our home page. This list of drop downs at the top of our website, they are consistent no matter which page you're on the website. They might look a little bit different on a mobile device, but they will be accessible no matter where you are on the website. And if you're accessing these modules from our public-facing website, you want to go to the section that's called For Professionals. And then under there is the learning modules. So once you click on that, it takes you to an overview about the modules, gives you a bit of a background and some of the modules that we have developed. This here is an image of a screenshot of what you'll see when you click through to it. So in the first paragraph here, it has a link, and we can use that to access your online profile. I'm using a demonstration user. So this is just a generic user profile. But from the public-facing website, if I click on that link, it takes us right to this page. And you can see the 4 modules that are there right now. Again, Introduction to Professionalism, Code of Ethics, Good Character, and using ProDev. It'll also show you the status. So Code of Ethics, Good Character, and ProDev here, they show new with an exclamation mark, indicating that this user hasn't accessed those. The Introduction to Professionalism module, you'll see it says attempted. When I was preparing for this presentation, we tried it out. And so because I started it, the system now recognizes that this user has actually tried to access these modules in the past. So when you're ready, from here, you can click on that box, and then you can launch the module. Before I do launch it though, I just want to show you the second method. So if you're already logged into our system, you're likely starting from this page, which is your own personal homepage on your online member profile. And this says demonstration user here, but when you log in, it'll have your name, and the ProDev summary that shows here will be specific to your professional development log. On the left-hand side here, we have a box that's called the Quick Links box. And within that Quick Links box, there is a link as well to the learning modules. So it's clicking on this link from within your profile will also take you to this landing page for the modules. And from there, you can choose one and get ready. Take note of these bullets here before you do launch. They do give you sort of tips and tricks on how to properly navigate throughout the system and understanding how to do that well. We've also provided some references here. So these are links to documents back on our public website that relate to the topic at hand. So in this case, for the Introduction to Professionalism, we've provided direct references to our complaints and discipline process, all of our practice guidelines, and all of our practice notes. But once you're ready, you click Launch Module. It'll open in a new tab or window, depending on your browser settings. And this is the front page of the learning module, e-learning module. It does provide you with an overview of the contents for that module here, but it does require you to complete sections before you can go on to another. So we can't yet click on these ones because we haven't made it our way through the course itself. But clicking on the Start Course button here, you'll see that the agenda for the module ends up on the left-hand side of the screen, and then the bulk of it is in this main window. From there, it's fairly intuitive to using a website. You're going to scroll to progress. There is, as I mentioned previously, there's narration available for all of the content. And so you can just click here on this play button and it will narrate that section.
Welcome to the Introduction to Professionalism module series. The following 3 modules will include the following: Introduction to Professionalism. This module is a brief overview of the requirements of membership with Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba and Protocols for Professionalism. Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics module will provide you with an understanding of the code as it pertains to you, your work, and your professional standing. Good Character. This module will walk you through best practices to maintain good standing and avoid problematic scenarios before they begin.
So you see, once you when you scroll through and you get to the end of a section, there's often elements that you need to complete before you can go forward. So in this first introduction section, you'll see it says complete the content above before moving on. So we have a little quiz here. Select all that apply. Members practice in a way that prioritizes the public's, and then you're expected to answer in any sort of in the way you would with any normal multiple choice question. So let's try safety, economic, and environmental well-being. Click submit. Zoom is interfering, sorry. There we go, submit. You get feedback on your answer immediately. If you want to, you can take that little question again. Otherwise, you can hit continue. What you'll discover as you go through these modules, we're not going to go through this module in detail, but what you'll discover is that there's little pieces to interact with, like these glowing radio buttons that want you to click and provide you with more information. See if I can get us to the next interactive element. So here we've got a table that shows us, the comparison between what we need to do before being registered as a member and then what we need to do after being a member. And you'll see that the next interactive element actually has a drag and drop activity where you are to take one of these boxes and drop it in the correct spot. And then once you've dropped them all, you would submit and find out if you got it right or not. So that gives you an overview of how to access, or a demonstration on how to access the modules. When you're complete, so you'll notice that you can close this tab and it brings you back to your online profile. It'll note that you've stopped taking the module and you can provide feedback here. Whatever it is you want to say, and save and continue. Then when you go back to the module index, it'll say attempted. But once you actually complete a whole module, it will note here in your personal profile that it has been completed. And in fact, that on your homepage, in your professional development log, it will actually log it there for you as an informal activity. So that's kind of a benefit of the system, is that we're hosting it locally. It's tied into your profile so that when you finish your modules, you don't need to then record the activity. It will actually record it for you in our system. So that brings us to the end of the presentation portion of today's session. We want to make sure that you had an understanding of why we're doing these e-learning modules. How did we get to where we are? What did the development of them look like? What do we currently have? And then how do we access those modules? So I'm going to stop there. We're going to open up for Q&A. I believe Angela should be setting you up so that you can unmute yourself if you choose to ask questions using your microphone or video, but otherwise you can send them through the chat. I see we have one written in the chat already. It says, how is EGM, how is Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba monitoring or following up that these modules are practicing in the practical world? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I'm going to attack it from a few different ways that I would interpret that question. One is, how do we know whether or not the modules are delivering the information well? We have that feedback element, which is people can submit questions or comments about the modules. We even have data to show, which pieces are working well and which aren't. So, for example, if one question is getting answered incorrectly by most users, maybe we need to re-examine that question. In terms of the development of these modules, they rely on paper guidelines, old school PDF documents, which have been developed and approved by, say, our investigations committee and/or council. And those groups are comprised of practicing members. So the input we get from people during the development of these guidelines comes from real world practicing members. And so that helps to tie into making sure that we're not sort of giving pie in the sky ideas. We're actually relating these to what it takes to practice in the real world. Along those lines, that's one of the reasons that, especially in the code of ethics and the good character modules, we wanted to ensure that we had real world examples of where people were disciplined and how that ties back to the concepts in those modules. Thanks for that question, Tara. Does anybody else have any questions? Question there is, can student members access the modules? I don't know for sure. I believe that we were trying to make sure that students had access to these modules. But if you are a student registered with us, log in and see if you can access it. If not, send an email to me, and we'll get that straightened out. But that was the intent, was that student members would be able to access these modules. We'll just wait a couple more minutes to see if there's any other questions that roll in. Again, either you can submit them in the chat by writing, or you can turn on your microphone or video and ask them directly. I do want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. I appreciate your eagerness to learn about these modules and to find out how to access them and the background. Do keep an eye out for upcoming sessions that we'll be holding specific to each of these modules. That will allow us to look into the details of one module and then have discussions. We are planning to hold them in person, depending on circumstances and how that plays out. And so please keep an eye out for those future sessions as well. Great. Thanks. I think that's Angela who's been providing answers there in the chat. Thank you, Angela, for doing that. Okay, if there are no other questions, we will end it there. I'll hang around for a couple more minutes in case somebody has a question that's still percolating in their mind and if they want to wait to ask it. But again, thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you at the next professional development seminar. Have a great afternoon and try to enjoy the snow.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, bye.
Bye.